Hi, this is Pastor Steve Webb of the Church of the Nazarene, and let me share a personal experience with you this morning. When my wife and I first moved to California, we participated in a church in Temecula, and I came to know an older man in that church, and he made a genuine impression on me. One day I learned that he had gotten discouraging news from a test for prostate cancer, so I went to talk with him and encourage him. I suggested something along the line that God has his best interest in mind, and to not give up, but to trust him. And he surprised me by laughing joyfully. He said, "Oh, Steve, I've been trusting God for 54 years now. Why would I stop trusting him now?" Well, needless to say, he ended up encouraging me, not the other way around. Well, a few months later, he passed away. At the funeral, our sanctuary was filled. Well over 300 people came. Extra chairs had to be set out. I was surprised because at most, maybe 10% of the people were associated with our church. A handful of them were family members. But who are all these other people, I wondered. But then in this part of the service where the microphone was offered to anyone who wanted to share, person after person came forward to share how their neighbor, Bob, the deceased, had been there for them when they needed help. It turned out that all these folks that I didn't know, well, they lived in Bob's neighborhood. One woman shared that when her husband left her, she had a lot of trouble maintaining her house. Bob fixed her toilets, changed her locks on the doors. Another person recalled that when their father, Bob's neighbor, was no longer able to walk, well, Bob just started mowing that guy's lawn along with his own. Another young man described when his mom remarried, he had problems with the new husband, and so after many bad incidents, Bob invited him to come and live with Bob and his wife, where he lived until he graduated from high school. And Bob taught him all about cars and how to fix them. Indeed, many of the stories that were shared involved Bob coming and rescuing someone whose car broke down, things like that. Bob's little cul-de-sac thought of him the way people used to think about the saints, you know what I mean? And it wasn't because he was some kind of holy man or something. It was because he was generous and kind, and he was willing to help. Look, a few people you will meet in your life are actually holy. You may not know what makes them that way or how to describe it, but you recognize it when you see it, right? And some people are charismatic, which the Oxford Dictionary defines as, quote, exercising a compelling charm which inspires devotion in others, unquote. These are likely to be people like your church leaders, but not necessarily. They might be in government or on TV. Remember comedian Jerry Lewis? He was running a telethon every year for muscular dystrophy. You may not remember Danny Thomas, but almost certainly you've heard of St. Jude's Children's Hospital. It is more meaningful to work at something than it is to be known as holy or as a big shot in your church, I think. If Jerry Lewis had been a monk in a monastery, probably no one would know about him. But he's remembered because of what he did, and doing something for others gave meaning and purpose to his life. Now how about Danny Thomas? More than 70 years ago, a young, struggling Danny Thomas, whose wife had a baby on the way, visited a Detroit church and was so moved during the Mass, he placed his last $7 in the collection box. And afterwards, when he realized what he had done, Danny prayed for a way to pay the looming hospital bills. The next day, he was offered a small part that would pay 10 times the amount he gave to that church. Danny had experienced the power of prayer. He attributed the answer to prayer to St. Jude and promised to build a shrine to that saint. In the early 1950s, Danny began discussing with friends what it would mean to actually build a shrine. And gradually, the idea of a children's hospital took shape. It would be in Memphis, Tennessee, where it would be the first fully integrated hospital in the entire south of the United States. In 1955, Danny Thomas and a group of Memphis business people settled on the idea of creating a research hospital devoted to curing catastrophic diseases in children, in addition to providing treatment to children. It is now, today a research center for the children of the world, regardless of race, religion, or financial status. Danny and his wife turned fundraising into pretty much a full-time job. In one 32-day period, they spoke in 28 different cities, raising money to build that hospital. And after they had enough funds to build the buildings of the hospital, Danny, who is himself a Lebanese American, turned to his fellow Arab Americans. Danny told them that it was this project that was a way to thank the United States for the gifts of freedom given to their parents, and that their support would be a noble way of honoring their immigrant forefathers. Danny's request struck a responsive chord in them. So in 1957, 100 representatives of the Arab American community met in Chicago to form a foundation called ALSAC, ALSAC, to fund the operation of Danny's hospital. ALSAC has assumed full responsibility for all the hospital's fundraising efforts today and raises hundreds of millions of dollars annually through benefits and solicitation drives among Americans of all ethnic, religious, and racial backgrounds. Today, ALSAC is the nation's largest healthcare charity and is supported by the efforts of more than 1 million volunteers nationwide. Look, I'm just Pastor Steve talking here, representing a small church in the desert in your town. I'm not a famous personality. I don't have great riches. I don't have a bunch of rich friends to cough up a lot of money for noble projects like Jerry Lewis and Danny Thomas did. But I admire what they did, and I know from reading their bios that these projects were extremely important to their sense of self. If you want meaning and purpose in your life, you need to involve yourself in something that you think is worthwhile, something for others, something that is, well, bigger than you are. You might think I told these stories to tell you to try to be another Jerry Lewis, but actually, that's probably out of reach for most of us. I know it is for me. No, I tell it to remind you that when Jerry Lewis put on a telethon, there were hundreds of volunteers answering the telephones. Volunteers ran the Jerry Lewis Muscular Dystrophy Foundation. I may not have a compelling charm which inspires devotion in others, but I can answer the phone. Danny Thomas had the fame and the personal network to put together the largest healthcare charity in the nation. But that hospital depends on over 1 million volunteers working in their staff and, raising money, and all of us who send a 20 every year. I mean, why do people volunteer? They find it personally rewarding. In the chaos of this life, you can give your time to something that feels like it matters. You find meaning and purpose in it. This isn't necessarily a religious thing. Anthropologists might say something like, the emergence of humans was marked by social behavior that increased the adaptiveness and the survivability of the species. It's sort of like taking care of your own children or your tribe. Volunteering takes care of the larger group, of the greater good, and it has become part of our genes and our learned behaviors. I would offer, in addition to what the anthropologists would say, that God has built it into us as part of his plan to lead us into righteousness and to reward good living. However you want to receive all that, just know you are part of a biological system in this universe which rewards doing good for other people. If you're lonely or dissatisfied with your life, or just feel like there's no purpose for everything, you need to get involved personally in something that matters, particularly something that matters to you. I want to direct a few comments at Christian believers. And if you don't believe in God, well, substitute the word nature or the phrase the universe everywhere I say God. The principles I'm going to lay out really are general enough to still have meaning in that extended context of the universe. Look, I'll speak from the Bible for a few minutes. The Bible has hundreds of references to serving others. I'll just read a few. The Bible book of Proverbs declares, Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and the Lord will reward them for what they have done. And the New Testament book of Galatians commands, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Now, I think you can hear in just these two verses alone that the ancient traditions focused a lot of attention on helping those who cannot help themselves. The book of Hebrews adds the reminder, and do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with sacrifices like these, God is pleased. You see, continually serving others is a form of expressing our faith in and to God. When we get tired of serving, we can be re-energized in our commitment by knowing that God sees us and He will not forget what we've done. And let me insert parenthetically here, if you're one of those folks inclined to substitute the phrase, the universe, wherever I say God, let me help you out here. Your faith is that the universe is causal and rational, and that your service makes a difference because it results in a change or in a legacy that persists in the universe even after you're gone. Now, the book of Hebrews adds another idea. Do not forget to do good and to share with others, for your sacrifices in this way pleases God. I guess it must be easy for people to forget to do good, since the Bible goes out of its way to remind us not to forget. A practical way to remember to do good is to just make it a daily part of your routine, a part of your prayers to ask God for specific ways throughout our day to serve and to share with somebody else. And of course, you need to follow through on those reminders once in a while, right? When Jesus spoke about service, he was very insistent on relating it to serving those in need. He didn't give much priority to religious expressions. He was all about actually doing the things that your religion values. In the Sermon on the Mount, he said, give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Now, that verse isn't hard to understand. It's simply saying if you have something to share, do so with an open heart and an open hand. You know, one way we could do this is by choosing to financially support missionaries or a ministry. Or you could go answer phones at a fundraiser, or serve food at a food kitchen, or put flags on veterans' graves on Memorial Day. What matters to you? When Jesus spoke about the judgment day, you know, the end of time when we stand before God, he said that God is going to separate all the people of the world who ever lived into two groups. One group is going to be rewarded with eternal life in heaven. The other group is going, well, where you don't want to go. Enough said. Jesus says the difference between the two groups is feeding the hungry, bringing water to the thirsty, providing shelter for the homeless, providing clothes to those who need them, taking care of the sick, and visiting those being held in prison. You know, one group does those things, and the other group never did. The difference between heaven and hell in Jesus' description puts a significant premium on serving others in need, don't you think? See, while Jesus said that if you believe in him, you're saved, well, apparently he expects more than that of all you Christian folk. And by the way, if that heaven and hell stuff is too strong for you this morning, think of it this way. If the social behavior of humans serves each other and continues to serve the common good, let's say, then there is every reason to believe that the future is bright for our kind. But if we continue to be tribal, if everyone serves only themselves, if we're going to continue to be the species that's really good at killing each other, well, what kind of future can there be? It is the difference between the bright, shiny future depicted in Star Trek and the dark, dismal future depicted in Star Wars. Do you see? Heaven and hell. Look, Jesus said this to us, quote, my command is this, love each other the way I love you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Now in the book of Romans, Paul says about this idea, very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Look, Jesus' love for people is extravagant. Of course, most of us are not able to literally lay down our lives on a daily basis for other people. What we can do is choose to spend our time and resources in a way that shows extravagant love, Jesus-style love, in smaller, practical ways. For instance, we can choose to go out of our way to help someone in need, even though it may be personally inconvenient to us. We can send some money to pay for a helping ministry. We can answer the phones at a fundraiser, right? Or serve food at a food kitchen, or put flags on veterans' graves. We can treat others the way we want to be treated ourselves. And hey, you know what? It's the difference between a good future and a bad future for all of us. Please, make a down payment for the greater good today, okay? And you know what? May God and nature and the universe all bless you. We'll see you again next week.